George Foreman, one of the most biggest powerhouses and biggest punchers of all time. We lost a very, very good man in George Foreman. He passed away yesterday, March 21st of 2025. While it is unknown exactly how he died, it's being said that he was in a hospital surrounded by his family members, and he just died very peacefully. In today's video, we're going to be paying a tribute to George Foreman, and I'm going to kind of walk you guys through his life and how he became a boxer, and then we'll be done here. So, George Foreman, he grew up as a very troubled teen. He was definitely a thug. Like, he would rob probably grocery stores, and he was rough growing up, but he was strong as can be. And he was kind of raised on a farm dealing with cattle, and when baby cows were born, he would literally pick them up over his head and bench press them. Now, George Foreman, he began his boxing career in 1969, and he fought all the way up until 1977 before he retired. What had happened in his boxing career, in the early part of George Foreman's boxing career, is that he was knocking everybody out, just whipping their heads silly. He had such devastating power that almost nobody could stand up to him, no matter what. And Muhammad Ali was the first guy to defeat him, and which is no surprise because Muhammad Ali was just a beautiful fighter. But what had happened with George Foreman is, after his fight with Muhammad Ali, when he went into the locker room, he was absolutely exhausted, and his heart was kind of failing on him. And so what had happened, and this was before George Foreman became a Christian, his heart kind of stopped working, and it's been said that George Foreman died. And so he had a vision of God when he died. And then what happened is that he was given another chance at life. The Lord brought him back because he wasn't done. And this was one of the most humbling experiences George Foreman ever went through. And he was so affected by this time that he fought a couple more times after Muhammad Ali beat him. I think he fought Jimmy Young, which beat him. And before that, after Muhammad Ali beat him, he fought Ron Lyle, which was a really, really strong puncher. But then he retired in 1977 at the age of 38 years old, or at the age of 28 years old, and he had a fight record of 45 wins with 2 losses, which is just absolutely incredible. Now, when George Foreman retired initially, he had given up boxing and he went full-time into ministry. He became a preacher, and he was so affected by his near-death experience that he didn't want to box anymore. He felt that the Lord was calling him to spread the gospel, which is exactly what he did for a while. But then what happened is he started taking care of foster children, which was unbelievably sweet. And I think it might have been said that George Foreman didn't have quite the funds that he wanted. And so he made a comeback in 1987 to try to raise some money to help support his lifestyle, taking care of those foster kids. And he fought a guy named Steve Zowski. That was his comeback fight in 1987. Now mark this, you guys. George Foreman had retired for 10 years. And then he finally came back in 1987 at the age of 38 years old. He then proceeded on to knock out almost every single last one of his fighters in his comeback. And he had a 24 fight win streak on his comeback record. And then eventually he faced Evander Holyfield in 1991. And Evander Holyfield was the one who snapped his 24 fight comeback win streak, which is incredible. And then He fought a couple more times against Tommy Morrison for the WBO vacant World Heavyweight Championship, and Tommy Morrison beat him. And then afterwards, he ended up fighting Michael Moore for the IBF, WBO, or whatever titles. And he was losing that fight really badly against Michael Moore. I guess I wouldn't say really badly, but he was definitely behind on points. Michael Moore was absolutely the favorite at the time because he was a lot younger than George Foreman. And at the time, George Foreman was pretty much like this fat 45-year-old man that was still fighting. And what happened is that he had caught Michael Moore off guard, and he basically threw a punch like this, and then he followed up with an overhand right, I think, and just boom! Clipped him right in the chin. And that absolutely just pulverized Michael Moore's body. He could not get up at all. And he had won the heavyweight championship twice for the second time at that time. And I think he went on to defend his heavyweight championship title 3 times. And then his very last fight was against Shannon Briggs, where he lost that fight and lost his title. And even then, his very last fight was controversial. I remember watching that fight years ago, and the people in the crowds were chanting, "Bull S, Bull S, Bull S, Bull S," totally on George Foreman's side. But he had a very illustrious career, and he was truly a beautiful man. And I think when George Foreman had made his comeback in the 80s, it was around that time, maybe a couple years afterwards, where he adopted the George Foreman grill. And so because of the George Foreman grill, he was an entrepreneur, and apparently he made a lot more money from the George Foreman grill than he'd ever made doing boxing. But I couldn't help but get on and make this video today because this morning, after my brother had sent me the notification last night about George Foreman dying, I just found myself bawling my eyes out. And George Foreman, he's going to be a very, very missed, beloved boxer. And he was a true champion at heart. He didn't start out as a humble guy, but he was kind of always a gentleman, unlike Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali was a very good fighter, and people loved him because he was such a beautiful fighter to watch, but he was the furthest thing from humble. George Foreman, it was just the opposite. And yeah, I'm still in shock that he's dead, but he was 76 years old. He lived a good life. He helped spread the gospel to a lot of people. And George Foreman, much like my grandfather, was very much a father to the fatherless. And the thing that makes George Foreman such a sweet man was his heart for the Lord. He truly gave his life up for Christ at the later part of his years, and he loved the Lord with all of his heart. He was truly authentic, and there's nobody else out there that's going to be like him ever again. In terms as being a good, humble Christian man, Muhammad Ali wasn't even close to George Foreman. People loved Muhammad Ali because he was a really good fighter. But yeah, Muhammad Ali definitely was not George Foreman. And I don't know what else to say. I'm really sad that George Foreman is dead. But I hope this gives you guys a perspective and an understanding about George Foreman's life. He really lived his life to the fullest. And one last thing that I could share with you guys, I know that at one point George Foreman lived in Wolf Creek, Oregon, which is very close to where I grew up. I grew up in Grants Pass, Oregon. And I actually have a client to this day named Sharon that knew George Foreman really well. And I remember she would talk to me about him a couple times. She's still alive. And she was good friends with him, grew up with him. And she was like, yeah, who would have ever known he would become so popular? So I think when Muhammad Ali died, it was sad, but I couldn't really feel it as much as I can feel George Foreman. George Foreman, I can really feel this death. And in my opinion, probably the guy that's going to be the closest to George Foreman that's still alive is Evander Holyfield, but he's definitely not George Foreman. So George Foreman will be missed, and let's just do our best to be good, humble Christian human beings. Take a page out of George Foreman's book, because he was a good man. Alright, you guys, that's it. I love you all so much, and thank you for watching.